Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you, Lori. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Lauren. How are you doing? In fact, I'm going to go back to that word I picked up some time ago, fabuloso. Remember, I had
Oh,
that, and people in the chat comment that I was kind of saying it correctly because I don't even know. It was just like one morning I woke up and I said, fabuloso is my new favorite word. So I'm going to be fabuloso today.
I love it.
It's getting to be more and more fall. I'm, near trees and leaves are. I love the fall. I have always loved the fall because I hate the heat. And, I lived in upstate New York out in the country. So once snow fell, we were that old expression socked in for how long, right? So
Uh,
that fall period was like that tipping point between the sun's gone, but the snowflakes haven't started yet.
I can only wish it was starting to get cooler here. I feel like last week I was saying it was cooler. And then it got hot, so it's typical California weather now,
Yeah.
or Southern California, I should say.
You just never know. Okay, you ready? We got a huge show today. I'm going to say huge. Oh, Finger Lakes. Yes, that is a beautiful area, Tara. I just saw a note from Tara. But we got a huge show going on today, Lauren. So let's jump into what we need to get done so we can make it happen.
Awesome, let's do it. Yeah, I'm super excited about today's show. It's going to be interesting, guys. But again, all of our shows are pretty interesting, so we have some really great guests. Let me go ahead and jump in, and then we'll get started. Good morning again to everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Lauren Simpson, and I am with the SBDC, or the Small Business Development Center. We are a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, and we offer no-cost services to local small businesses. Our services are at no cost to you because your tax dollars have already taken care of our fees. For the Los Angeles Regional Network, we service the Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. And if you take a look at the map in front of you, you'll see our physical center locations. You will see that we are in Camarillo, Santa Clarita, Pasadena, all the way out to Laverne. That's that little waymark near Ontario, throughout Los Angeles, the South Bay, down into Long Beach. Here's a deeper dive into what it is that we offer you, again, for free. We offer no cost business advising. And so you're able to sit one-on-one with one of our business experts. We have experts in various fields, from market research, if you are just starting your business and looking to create a business plan. If you are looking to grow your business and you're looking for capital, we have a specialized team just for you. It's called the ACT team. And then we also, and I believe, Lori, you are a member of that team as well.
I am.
And
Yes.
and I mentioned Lori, but she's also the guru of all numbers. And so you're able to sit with her either related to access to capital, as she's a part of the ACT team, or taxes, finances, honestly, anything with a numeral, she's got you. And then we also offer virtual trainings. And those trainings are going to be comprehensive workshops that assist you in beginning your business, adapting, and growing. Sure to get in contact with us, guys. We'd love to help you and work with you and get you started and going. You can reach us by phone, 866-588-7232. You can also go online, smallbizla.org/new client. Now, if you've reached us and you're outside of our service area, that means that you are outside of the Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, or Ventura counties. Please go to americassbdc.org/find your SBDC. Quick housekeeping, guys, as I stop my screen share. Oh, first off, good morning, Brenda. Good morning, Emma and Christine. Nice to see you all, or have you join us, I should say, because I can't see you. But Lori, quick housekeeping. Let's be sure that everyone knows to put all questions into the Q&A, and then check the chat for useful links and information that we'd like to share with you. With that, Lori, that's all I got. Kicking it over to
Awesome.
you.
Thank you. I got to tell you guys, I mentioned I moved over to the Mac system. I'm getting a little bit better. Like, this is only my second week that I committed to doing the show on the Mac. So I'm like all nervous. I'm touching things really lightly to make sure I don't mess it up. So if I do anything weird, it's because I haven't got used to the Mac yet, but it's going to be good. So here is my myth buster for today, guys. You're going to love this headline. Legal structures don't move, people and things do. I'm getting clever. So I bring this up quite a bit on these confusing aspects of when you are legally structured as an LLC, typically is what I see this at. It can be an S Corp, C Corp, but I'm really talking about LLCs because that's where people get confusion. They perhaps created an LLC in one state, and then this is what I get asked a lot because my area is in California, they moved to California and they believe that they moved their company to California. And so they say, how do I move? What do I need to do? Well, there is no such thing as moving a legal structure. This use of language and belief that you're moving the structure has caused many people to get so confused that they've gotten into a legal nightmare. I seen somebody who actually started an LLC in one state, moved physically to another state, did not dissolve it, started an LLC in another state, and then did it again. And when I had to go and research all this, they had suspensions and fines. It was just a nightmare. See, what you want to understand is state statute and the word charter. So state statute is where your legal entity is registered. You're registered within the state of California. You're registered within the state of Montana, wherever it happens to be. And so when you file papers to register your company, you notice that you're registering in that state. You're not registering the legal structure on a federal level. Therefore, it doesn't move. An excellent example to explain this is, could you imagine saying, I moved my driver's license. I just moved my driver's license. You would go, no, I had to, dissolve or discontinue or cancel my driver's license because I'm now a resident of this state. And then I had to get a driver's license in this state. Now, it's the same concept with one added layer. You have two options. You can dissolve in the past state and start in the new state, or you can file a document called a foreign entity doing business in California. The disadvantage of that is once you file the foreign entity doing business in California, you are subjected to the exact same fines, the franchise fees, all of the different aspects of being in business in California. That does not change, but you then are also still subject to any type of fees or regulations, state taxes, etc., filing of income taxes in that previous state. So if you've completely left the state, there's typically no reason to stay in that state, and it's better to dissolve. So what I'm wanting to communicate here is, number one, get it out of your head that companies move. But number two, verbiage and legalese language is extremely important. Now, I'm not against DIY. I'm a famous DIY. People know I get chainsaws out, anything, because I watch a YouTube video. But when it comes to finance, legal, especially legal jargon, you really have to understand the meaning of the words. This same individual, as she was setting up, or I was suggesting either registered a new company, she kept saying, oh, I'm just changing the name. And I said, no, you're not just changing the name. So when she called the IRS, she said, oh, I don't need a new EIN because I asked him, I'm just changing my name. You're not, you're registering a new charter. So it's real important to look through these words and have a full understanding of what they mean. Okay, speaking of legal structures, I've got my legal structure webinar coming up. I'm also got my new financial literacy session coming up in November. I've got the one remaining for October if you wanted to jump into that. And I may have mentioned this, I don't know, I've been playing with the idea of creating a webinar specific to the profitability and time-based calculations and billable versus non-billable, only about a service-based business, whether you're in a consulting model offering your own services or also hiring contractors or employees. So I think, look for that probably like November. I'm going to work on that. It may come out before the end of the year, beginning of next year, which is a webinar only dedicated towards service-based businesses. because I got a lot of requests for that. Upcoming shows next week, we got Valerie, and she's going to talk about her show, or her company, I mean, Intrepid Ayurveda. And for many, it's just even learning about Ayurveda. So it's going to be fascinating to learn about what she's doing and the challenges she is having as she is exploring having a company offering these services. And then Matt and Karina is going to come on. They own Bayshore RV Park. I know RV parks and RVs and, you know, kind of transient logistics is a popular topic. We had somebody that builds tiny homes on quite some time ago. In fact, I got to get with them and have them come back on and give us an update. But I thought, you know what? We need somebody from an RV park talking about what it takes to own a RV park, because that is also a very, very interesting concept for a lot of people. So that is what's coming up in the future. But right now we are going to be talking about today. So I'm really excited about our next guest. Dan Davidson is owner, director, Coffee with a Cause, which is a nonprofit providing job training and employment for transitional age youth. Coffee with a Cause owns and operates a social enterprise cafe in Pasadena called Rosebud Coffee. And I'm not going to tell you anymore because we're going to talk a lot about it during the show, because Dan has a fascinating story and a fascinating background. Dan, welcome to the show.
Lori, thanks for having me. It's a joy to be with you all today.
There is so much, like we were talking before the show started, and I told Dan, there's so much to unpack here. I feel like a little kid in a candy store. I'm like, I'm going to go here. I'm going to go here. No, I want to talk about this. I want the audience to know this. I feel like I'm all over. I got to like sit down in a sense of calmness and create some kind of pathway. So where we're going to start is with I'm going to call it this, Dan, the humble beginning of the coffee shop, which is a brick and mortar now, because I think that's the first part of the fascinating story, and it will start unpacking a lot. So why don't you tell us the beginning of the coffee shop, the inspiration, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. Love to share the story. So it began for me after I had moved up to Pasadena to actually restart a church. So I'm trained as a pastor. So that's kind of what brought me to Pasadena. But as I'm getting this church reopened, it's a church in Pasadena near our city college. And unfortunately, some of the very first neighbors I met were actually youth that were sleeping in the church parking lot. So my first neighbors were youth experiencing homelessness. And as a young pastor coming in, trying to help in my neighborhood, I was like, wow, this is not good. I got to do something. I got to respond to this need. And so I began to work with the young people, providing some safe space and some food, clothes, the normal kind of basic needs. But that quickly two things happened. One was way beyond the capacity I had to actually make a long-term difference. And then two, it kind of got out of hand. It quickly built into the community, the neighbors that I'm trying to meet for getting the church going, like, what is happening on this corner? And so I had to disband that because it wasn't a healthy long-term solution. But what happened is, as I did that, I helped the youth get placed into some wonderful local nonprofits that provide supportive services for youth transitioning out of the foster system or exiting homelessness. And I realized, wow, there's some great places that can really help and assist with housing and education and case management and the whole kind of, but I realized, like, if I wanted to have an impact, the piece that was missing was helping the youth transition from those services onto their own. And I thought, wow, how could we do that? How could we help them? And just, very simply thought, well, getting a job is probably the first thing someone can do to move towards self-sufficiency. And so we thought about, okay, how could we help them find a job? And as I get the church going, I'm sitting on this old coffee cart that was just collecting dust in a church that had been shut down. And it was a coffee cart that someone had spent a lot of money on. And I was trying to sell it. I wanted the value, so I had more budget for the church startup. and no one wanted to buy this thing. So a friend of mine and I came up with the idea was, hey, well, let's put it to use. And so we went back to the nonprofits that were servicing the youth and we said, hey, we'd love to do some job training in coffee. And this was 2012. So the coffee scene was just starting to grow in what's called third wave coffee in LA. And so we kind of caught that wave at the very beginning and we're like, oh, let's learn this type of craft, special handmade coffee that we can introduce to the young people. And so the youth started to come to the coffee cart. I found baristas that would share their time and volunteer and start the training. And that's the humble beginning on this coffee cart inside the church, paired with local baristas and local youth.
Now, that is one of the greatest stories I ever heard. I absolutely love it. I love the fact that you're sitting on this coffee cart and then you figure out how to combine both the situation that you experience with the youth when you're trying to open the church and the coffee cart. And I think that's a lot what entrepreneurship is kind of, looking around you at what you're currently experiencing, what you're seeing, and what you can do to make a difference. And that's why I love the beginning of the story. So let's go just kind of, because we're going to go in different directions here and fill in the holes. So today, let's talk about the cafe. It's no longer a coffee cart.
That's
It's
right.
moved. So let's kind of, we're going to go back and put in the middle part, but let's take it from the coffee cart to what is it today?
Yeah, so today we operate a brick and mortar coffee shop, and that's Rosebud Coffee in East Pasadena. And so what that means is it's basically a kind of a normal for-profit cafe and providing normal services that you would find, especially Wi-Fi. People love to come and work. And we also fall, we received a grant to add a roaster. So now we're not just having the coffee brewed on site and served, but we're also roasting the coffee beans on site so that we can kind of customize the flavor profiles and the blends. But alongside that, right, running just a normal cafe, Rosebud, the youth come and they participate after they've been trained into like the experience of being a barista. And then after what we've now created as like, a training program, when they graduate from the program, then we may hire them into the coffee shop as part of the barista team, just kind of depending on what hours we have available. So it also becomes kind of a pipeline for the youth that we support. And then the youth come in and then get trained and then join us. But we've started to grow the youth program beyond just coffee now. So I'm talking about where we are today. So the nonprofit Coffee with a Cause also provides these job internships and job readiness and other small businesses. So we have partnerships with local businesses that are like retail or construction, landscaping. My favorite is chocolate. So during the pandemic time when our cafe was closed, and we had to serve everyone out the door because no one could come in, a young entrepreneur, Harris Carr, approached me about sharing the space to get his chocolate company started. So we worked with him for almost a year, about 9 months of helping him get that chocolate company up and running inside the coffee shop because we weren't really using the space for anything. And then, he was testing his recipes of chocolate with our customers and figuring out his brand and all of that. And then when the pandemic stuff opened, he was able to relocate into a new space and we were able to send with him half of our coffee team to run coffee for him, including our youth. And then since then, we've been sending a few interns his way to get trained in chocolate. And that's Car Chocolate in Pasadena that has actually blown up really well with a famous chocolate croissant. So that something to check out. Yeah, visit Car. But his humble origin began with Rosebud. So we've just had this kind of opportunity to like help others flourish as much as we can out of Rosebud, as also with the nonprofit providing the internships in other locations for the youth.
Well, couple thoughts. First of all, I got to get him on the show. So that's
Yes.
me doing the talent search. I got to get him on the show. But I had a couple thoughts that came up to mind as we were speaking, Dan, and that is this is me personally, I really think having youth involved in some kind of job training program is so beneficial because not only is it giving them skills, but it gives them a purpose, it gives them an accomplish, it gives them feedback, it gives them learning. When I grew up in a small little country town. Those that are familiar with me on the show, I was podunk. I wasn't even small. I was podunk. I didn't even know how small I was. I was that small, right? And so I grew up having to work on the farm since I was a kid. And I despised it, for years as a kid. My parents made me work on the farm. It was cruel. There should have been a law up. But, looking back at it now, I know so much of my personality was created in that. And I remember Wayne Dyer said, you can't cram on a farm. You got to plan and everything. So I think job training is phenomenal. And I love what you're doing. Now, another aspect of your story that I thought was really interesting, and I talk a lot about on the show, is it's every entrepreneur that comes on and says, well, then we met this person, and then this happened, and then this happened. And I've been talking a lot about the small companies being able to take over the world. And I've been really stressing to people, take your power back and know that these big companies that we talk about, well, we need a strategic plan. No, small companies are, well, then I did this, and then I met them, and then I met this, and then this came together. It's this little building, a little solid piece at a time.
That's right.
So it made me wonder, if I looked at your business card, Dan, do I see pasture MBA? Do I see business training? Because you're sure talking like you know what you're talking about. So it seems to me you've got some words of advice to that person who has no business training that suddenly finds themselves in some type of business world. Take it from there, Dan.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Not trained as an entrepreneur or in business. My master's is in divinity of all things, not business. But I think what I realized is we had this need we were meeting with the youth and with the training, and that was happening. And just going back real quick before I share more on that, kind of the natural growth of it. To your point about youth and how important it is for them to experience that kind of. So what we've learned and seen and experienced on our end is that when a young person who's been in a system constantly receiving and kind of being like ushered through a system, when they're coming into a place like Rosebud or a job training program, what happens is it's an opportunity for them to create. It's an opportunity for them to make, to construct, to do something with their own hands. And then when you pair that with business and you serve a customer and that customer pays for this service, all of a sudden for our youth, it grows great value internally. They're like, wow, look what I've done, what I've completed, and someone has bought it, right? And that is a really transformational experience that we find with the young people we get to work with. So I just wanted to highlight that because that's our experience as well. And so when that was kind of like part of the learning curve for me was we're training youth and we're realizing like, okay, this is good, but it wasn't having the fullest impact we wanted. And so we're like, two thoughts came to mind. Is like, how can we let the youth have live experience? What's it going to take for us to do that? And then second, I was thinking like, man, this is a great ministry my church is doing, but my church is paying for it. And I have also other budget items I got to pay for. So I had to think strategically like, oh, well, how do we actually create some sort of like economic support for this ministry? And obviously coffee is can be an easy sell because people love their coffee. So that helped us realize we really need to grow the ministry and the program into a business. And what that looked like originally was for us to take the coffee cart, which was a large one, again, just kind of stationary. I tried to see if I could open up a cafe in the church. We weren't zoned for that. There's a lot going on there. So we built a smaller cart. And the small cart, so the big cart, so my church is a Rose City Church, and then Rosie was our big cart, and then we built Rosebud, this small little coffee cart. And we decided, okay, let's take that out. And we started to get invitations to run the small coffee cart at private events. So we go to a wedding, or we would go to like maybe a small private business event, and our youth would go with us. And that's when we began to see the flourishing really happen, is in those live experiences. And we were also at that time starting to learn about business itself, which was, oh, well, if we're going to do this and take all this time on it, we need to get paid for it because it's very costly. And so we would charge for the event and get paid for it. I'm like, wow, people paid us. Okay, we were learning too. And from then, eventually we're kind of like, wow, this is a lot of work to do events. And they're not as consistent. You don't know when you're going to happen. And so the next thought was, okay, how do I turn this into like a more sustainable economic model? And my research at the time showed that the brick and mortar was the best option for us. And again, I had no idea what to do. So at that time, to move and transition to brick and mortar, I called up my local SBDC, which is in Pasadena, and started meeting with the experts and the mentors there. And since then, I've always been going back to the SBDC anytime I have something to process. And then they helped me kind of think through all of the steps. And then Rosebud as a cafe brick and mortar opened a few years later in 2017.
See, now that's a fascinating, Dan, because opening a brick and mortar, I don't care whether it's a coffee shop, like we were talking before we started, a yogurt, a yoga, that's a heavy commitment and that's a challenge. And you have to get money, you'd have TIs, you have a whole lot of stuff going on here that you suddenly had to be exposed of. So give us a few pictures of things that were challenging, things that you kind of learned how to overcome, and including like how did it feel when suddenly you being a pastor is overwhelmed with all of these business aspects?
Yeah, Lord, that's I can go on that for a while. So I try to keep it brief, but because it was overwhelming, but it was also very exciting, right? Because you go in there and you have this vision and it's like, wow, I can see this kind of thing come together. But the first challenge was finding a space, a location. I wanted something that was close to the church so that, I had easy access and it was going to be, connected in a sort. And so I had this one building that was available that I in East Pasadena. I was like, man, I really want this one. This looks fantastic. It was, multi-story and it had this loft and Spanish tile. And I was like, oh, this is it. But the parking that was needed for the regulations of Pasadena didn't match. So it wasn't going to fit for a retail space that provided food and drink services. But directly across the street, like if I just turned around, there was this other building that was actually occupied by an event company called Chirp, and they were doing events and parties for young kids. And one day, the health department in Pasadena knew I was looking for a space because I was the one asking, like, hey, what can I do with my cart? Hey, can I do it in the church? And so the health department called and said, hey, we just talked to the owners there at this event space, and they're actually like looking to get out. Would you be interested in subleasing? And so it just kind of randomly, in one sense, I was looking this way, turned around and got introduced to another location right behind me, and that became the site for Rosebud. But that was just to say, like, finding the location. I don't know what the best advice is on that, other than to just keep looking, right? Just stay on it. Know your neighborhood, stay in the area you want to be in, and just knock on doors until one of them finally opens. And then after that, it was a matter of, like, once we found the location, raising the capital, because once you have your location, you know the kind of renovation that needs to take place. So thankfully for me, having the church and the community network, I was able to raise some financial support. Two thoughts on that one, just kind of throwing some ideas. One is I definitely did not raise enough. So
Yeah.
that's a heads up. Like, you set your budget, raise twice as much if you can, because you just never know what's going to come your way. But second, like, tap
Dan
this.
may have froze for a minute. Oh, there he is.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
And the second thought is, tap your social capital, right? Tap your network, the family, the friends, the people that can believe in you, believe in your vision. And that's how we were able to raise enough money to open and to renovate. And so after that, then it became a challenge of, what's our product? Like, who are we as a local cafe? Yeah, we have our story of what we do with the young people and the job training, but we knew at the beginning the story may draw someone once, but coffee is habitual. I'm looking for customers that come back. And so our product was, the had to be superb, and the experience, the customer experience, the feel, all of that was necessary to figure that out, land that, so that our customers would come back again and again. So I'll pause there, Lori, just kind of going in a couple
Great
of
point.
thoughts of where that could go.
I was a couple things, one on the real estate. One of the things that I noticed is sometimes people like it's like buying a car, don't fall in love with the first car, or the first house
Yeah,
because you can't afford it, right? So a lot of times if you fall too in love with the real estate, you end up with a situation that doesn't financially work. I wanted to throw that out real quickly.
absolutely.
But one of the things you talked about that I love, and this will help us launch into something, and that is the fact that people buy coffee habitually. They may go and purchase one time for the nonprofit reason. And so, Dan, I got two things here.
Yeah.
One is that I noticed that a lot of the up and coming entrepreneurs, which, I love this about it, but there's also some considerations, are very social minded, and that's a great thing. But they also get a little bit into the disbelief that the social cause will drive the revenues on its own. And you notice that real quickly. So I want you to comment on that. And then another one, and we talked about this before, and one of our anonymous attendees just asked the same question. Is this organized for profit? Because I said that too. I was like, Dan, is this a profit, nonprofit? What is this? So I think right now we can go and talk all about the nonprofit aspect of things, and starting with how is the company organized, and what you have to realize, a nonprofit just doesn't drive revenues in the fact that it's just a nonprofit. It needs other activities involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I can't recommend the way we've structured it because I don't know the best way to do it. But the way it happened for us is as I was growing the coffee cart business and the events, I wanted to separate the finances from the church. So I knew I wanted those separate. And so we just formed an LLC, a simple, LLC, because that was an easy thing for us to figure out. And then that LLC was owned by the church, which is itself a nonprofit. So my kind of structure was kind of like started that way. And my experience with starting a church is like, it's its own version of a business, but it's a lot of asking for money, and it's a lot of, kind of with the tithes and offerings. And so I wanted to learn how to sell something, not just ask based off of like the work we do. And so I shifted the focus to running a business as a business. And I put the, let's say, grants and like asks for funds on pause for a long time because I really wanted to learn how to manage and run the business. And so it wasn't until I stepped out of the church a couple of years ago during the COVID years. And then I formed a new nonprofit, and that's Coffee with the Cause. And we moved the coffee shop, the LLC, under the new nonprofit. And at that point, I was like, okay, I'm ready to learn the grants again. But I had figured out first, like, how do we just operate a business? So, Rosebud as an LLC for profit, pays all the taxes, it does everything it needs to do. But any profit we make goes into supporting the nonprofit, right?
Okay,
The
gotcha.
Coffee with the Cause, the programming we're developing for the youth into other small businesses and other locations. So any profit we make, and just so you know, I'm going to put this out there too, like coffee shops aren't very profitable. So
No.
if you're into making profit, that's probably not the best. Talk to me about like the tech companies we support through the Alliance for SoCal Innovation, because that's a different world and that's has a different focus. But cafes are fantastic for community, for job training, for easy entry into the workforce. So anyway, the little profit we make just gets funneled simply right back into the nonprofit to support the work of expanding job opportunities and readiness.
And you're so correct on that. I've looked at financials for startups of coffee shops. I looked at existing coffee shops. I looked at it across the board, and they're very challenging to make money. Fun to have. I think it'd be fun to have, but very challenging. Dan, you mentioned something, and I wanted to go into this. So you have several different access to capital programs that you're involved in. I'm not going to go off and name them. I'm going to let you bring them in and talk about them each. So now, like I said, this is so much to unpack. Now we got a whole nother angle we're going to
There we
discuss.
go.
And that is access to capital for startups and the ones you're involved in. So give us a talk about what are you doing and what are these entities? I'm just going to call them because I don't know if they're companies or what. So I'm going to say, what are these entities? And you fill it all in, okay?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So the one that I spend the most time with is a nonprofit, actually. So another nonprofit. It's called the the Alliance for SoCal Innovation, and it's a nonprofit that supports the entrepreneur and innovation ecosystem of Southern California. And so it's a nonprofit that just really wants to provide jobs in SoCal, right? And some of the best jobs we can offer are going to be in tech, or it's going to be in what we would call venture capital, venture ready businesses. Businesses that can scale. So, it's been really fascinating for me to learn like small business, just my cafes on the corner of a certain location in East Pasadena, versus the companies and entrepreneurs that we get to support with access to capital that can scale businesses that could be global, right, over time. And the program we offer, it's a free program for entrepreneurs. And so we're looking for businesses and startups that are venture ready, that can scale. And we just have a simple application and we do some evaluations. And then after that, we basically do warm introductions to investors. So at the Alliance, as we're supporting the whole ecosystem, not just the startups, but also research institutions and corporations, we've got a wide network of people, and that includes venture capitalists and investors. And so we get to, for the companies that go through our process of evaluation, provide those warm introductions, because we're focused on, providing access to founders that may not have that kind of network, or are in underserved communities, or maybe representing underserved population groups, right? So groups that don't really have access to these large networks of investors, we kind of become that middle person to knock on the door on their behalf and try to get those introductions between the startup and the investor so that they can get the capital to scale their business. So that's the SoCal Venture Pipeline program we have. And then the other nonprofit that I support and work with, and this is just more like consulting on the side, is going to be for churches that are interested in generating different types of revenue beyond just the tithes and offerings. So a lot of churches are trying to figure out, as things change socially for the church world, how do we generate, and sustain budgets on mission beyond just the tithes and offerings as kind of the main mode of doing that. And so that's helping the churches figure out how do they start their nonprofit that could receive grant funding to offset their budget, or maybe start their own social enterprise that can generate some revenue and pay some of their people, right? That can create some job opportunities. And so I work with a group called Mosaics Global Network. That's just a US kind of, well, and they've got some access in Europe as well, to help churches kind of think differently about how they can be involved in their local economy while supporting their mission and their budget as well. So those are a couple of the things. And then, yeah, I'll stop there. So
yeah, and
hopefully that gives a little broad picture.
It does. And I put in the chat. I realized I hadn't given Lauren any of these names. So I just threw a little bit of information of these companies from Dan's bio into the chat. Yeah. So you have it. Couple things. First of all, Dan, you talked very much like a business person. It's so funny. I know that you're not, and you have no training. I'm like, I've been a banker and I've been around investment banking a lot, have been in boards and everything. And I'm like, you talk like, you just sound just like them. I'm amazed, so you definitely sound more like a business person, which is a compliment. And I think this is where I'm going with this on the second one. What I love, and I hear a lot about it on the show, is that people no longer have any titles. They're just going out and they're doing these really powerful things in the community and finding people and working together and creating opportunity for themselves. And I really think if we look around everything that's happening in our world, we can get very scared and very depressed. But if we just take our focus and work with whatever is around us, we can see that's where we create the better world. One person, one thing, one opportunity at a time. And that's just was what was I was thinking about as you were speaking. Yeah. I want to go back to this concept of grants. I said a really positive thing here. So Dan, now I'm going to be a little bit of a myth buster on this next one, because I think you can speak to this. And I only do this to help people understand things about grants. I get a lot of entrepreneurs coming to me with a business model that they're going to use the grants to start. They feel as though, especially, and unfortunately, it's a confusion because over the last couple of years with the COVID grants, they were handed out easily. There was a lot, the money was flowing. And so if you're a new entrepreneur, Dan, and you just see those last 3 years, suddenly you think, well, I'm going to start my business with a grant. grant because there was grants to start businesses with grants, right?
That's right.
So there's this huge misconception. And now I feel as though we have to do our part to re-educate
That's right.
on what it really takes. So you are dealing with grants a lot. I think you would be good to give us kind of some anecdotal discussion about getting grants. What is it all about?
Yeah, no, Lori, that's a great point. And I think it's the same in both worlds, like the nonprofit world and the startup, let's say entrepreneur world. Like you really, the best place to start is with the friends and family that can support you and believe in you and really catch the vision for the business or the nonprofit, the service that you want to provide. And I kind
And
of
I got
came
to tell you, Dan, we call them in banking friends, family, and fools. But
and false. There you go. That's right. The three F's. That's
but
right.
yeah, the friends, family, and fools, you can
Yeah.
count on them.
That's right. Okay, throw a few fools in there too, right? That are willing to put some money in as you learn. But yeah, so even like that, I think is still just true, right? I just wanted to say that, and that being my experience as well. And then as I put the grant research on pause to learn the business, and then we set up the nonprofit, I went back to now work on the grants.
Okay.
And man, oh my gosh, I was like, yeah, I'm really glad I didn't start with that, and I could set up a business that has, daily sales and revenue, because the grant work is so hard. It's one of those things where you have to really start small. And I've been around and I've been doing this work with the youth for, I don't know, 8 years, long time, right? But what I didn't do is I didn't have a track record of all the data that I needed to provide for these grant applications, right? It's like, okay, how many youth have stayed in jobs after they've graduated, and where are they now? And there's a whole system that the grant world funds around. And if you're looking at starting with a grant, well, A, you don't have the track history. And then B, that track history also has to be proven over time. And you have to be able to show how you've done this and hit these metrics for the social good that you're providing over time. And even then, your best step is to probably look for small foundations that are willing to invest in you and are willing to provide the next stage of capacity building for your nonprofit before you can get to these larger grants that may be state or county or federal. And so it's a whole progression. And since 2 years now of getting the nonprofit figured out, the other thing I got to throw in there is how important the board is. Like if you want to go for grants, your board is a reflection of you and the services. And so that also takes time to set the right people together that are going to be behind you, supporting you, and also on paper look like the right fit for who you're serving, right? And so there's a whole process there that you've got to go through, but it's just a slow build, the 3 F's, and then smaller foundations. And then from there, you can move towards the county and then like state and eventually the federal. And that's kind of the path we've been on and working towards that the last 2 years, even though I already had before that 6 years of serving the youth. So I would just say I'm even learning to tap into grant writers, find some consultants that can help us, because I would not say grants is an easy bucket of funding at all.
No. And I've been around it just enough to have an awareness, because when people have had to put the data together, I've had to help putting the financials together. So I had to see the applications to work on the financials. But what you said was a really good point, Dan. And that's what I communicate to people, is that you have to have a proven track record. And I
Yes.
feel, having been around investment banking and venture capital as well, Dan, I feel as though you had to have a more defined, proven track record to get a grant than you had to in venture capital, because venture capital was looking at least what they felt they could help you create or become. The grants are looking at making sure that you have a fiduciary responsibility of
100%.
using that funded money wherever it came from in the proper way. And so it's all on what have you done, and let us see the data and prove that you've done it. So you really expressed a lot of information. Now, in addition, you said that you're, with the different companies, you're also around getting money outside of grants. And we were talking before the show, and I talk a lot with my banker friends, and the concept is the pipelines are kind of being turned off a little bit. So talk on that, what you're seeing, because you mentioned it as well.
Yeah, that's right. So, helping others access capital today is a lot different than a couple of years ago. With, the economy was different as we're all trying to get out of COVID, right? And so money was available to help us all do that. And thankfully, so my shop would not have survived COVID without the support we received from Idle or PPP. All of that we did depend on to get us through that year. But and so that those funds were made available, and so it changed, at least in the startup world. It changed a couple things. It made entrepreneurs think that capital was everywhere.
Yeah.
And maybe it was, right, for a time, because there was a lot of it and people wanted to try things and see what they could do. But since then, things have really begun to kind of like return back to maybe a normal form of the economy. And now we're finding, at least in the venture capital side, that there's a lot of due diligence being done. It doesn't mean the funds and the money isn't there. What it does mean, though, is everyone is taking their time. It's not a fast process, and they really want to find and have the best perfect match. So you may be thinking like, oh, the money, yeah, money's there, but the gate has gotten narrower, and they're asking everyone to kind of really like make sure things align before they write the checks. But they're still writing the checks. It's just slowed down, and it's a matter of finding best matches. And so I think that's kind of where, I'm grateful for the opportunity to help founders find those best matches through the investors that we've gotten to know. But it really is about the right kind of networking. And even when it comes to everything I've done, my even work with the Alliance was because I had, alongside of getting the coffee shop going, I was serving in the city as a volunteer, helping address homelessness. And I was pulling together the faith community to gather with the city and the local, like larger kind of economy, to address homelessness together. And over time, we began to see in Pasadena homelessness drop by 50%. And
Wow.
it was this collaborative effort that we were doing, and we had the faith in the city and everyone involved with that. And at the time, the city council member, who runs the nonprofit I work for now, was involved with all of that. And so when I was ready to step out of the church and take on a couple of things, he approached me and said, "Hey, well, come work for us," right? But it was that network I had developed already along the way that provided this opportunity that I'm in now. And so it's just kind of highlighting, how important developing those relationships and just being available and open to meet with all sorts of people, because you never know where those opportunities may come and how your network may develop.
It's so true. You do not ever know. So, I'm going to go into a topic that I think you're going to have a profound understanding and be able to advise on, Dan. And this has to do with employee and employee turnover. Those
Oh
companies,
yeah.
the small companies that hire employees, they always have a real challenge with employees. And you know what I hear a lot? And I'm not even talking about troubled youth, but when you have a business model where you're hiring younger people, I hear a
Yes.
lot of people my age going, the kids today, they just quit without even telling you, or they don't show up or anything. So what comes to mind is you have got to have to deal with that a bit.
Yes.
And also and this could be me with my background growing up on a farm, being German. I think that structure and discipline in a positive way helps things to flow. So I'm assuming also part of your style has to give some structure to the youth, and maybe that is even helping. I don't know. These are all things in my head. Unpack and talk about employee challenges, because a lot of the people in our audience may be experiencing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a cafe which kind of offers entry level jobs, yeah, turnover and retention is something that we face and have faced. And so I think the way that we've approached it, like I've learned to approach it over time, I think the first one is understanding like how important wages are for the people coming in. And so we were kind of on a supporter of, let's say, raising the minimum wage in Pasadena. Because what we were finding is a young person, even coming in, wasn't able to kind of afford everything on their own as the economy became more expensive. And so, as we began to raise our hourly wages, and thankfully also because we're a cafe, we have tips that go with that, and we have a great supporting community. We're able to start providing like a higher amount that created more financial stability for a young person to stay put. Because what really was happening often for us is someone would get moved because they had to leave to find a place that was more affordable. And in our space, in the type of business we have, as soon as a barista is too far away, it's too hard to get them there on time with traffic and all of that. And so we realize like the more we can kind of financially, as best as we can, match the need of the young person, and the way that the economy has changed has helped us retain individuals. And so I think that's just something I wanted to highlight. And then the second thing, well, and I want to pause on that too, because the other thing I've learned is that in our kind of job, we aren't able to grow with someone's career as much as we would hope we could. And so I've also had to have people transition out because simply they needed better opportunities than we can provide. So I want to highlight that too, is like, you got to know what you're providing, and I realized along the way that, like, man, I'm keeping someone too long and I'm preventing them from greater career growth because the positions I have are limited in that way. And so we've had to have those conversations and help someone progress and find something that's going to meet financially their need as they, grow older and their career advances. And so we couldn't meet that. We had to help them transition. And then as far as like the structure, I think for us, it was helpful because we were building the program along the way. And the more we've kind of refined that, I think the more that's also helped us all stay on the same page. But it also doesn't mean we don't continue to refine it and continue to like pull up the meetings together and keep us on the same page. Because as people come and go and the team dynamic changes, we've learned, or I've learned, that the more we can keep that community talking well, tight. So we use like Slack, right? We use, communication tools so that everyone's chatting and talking well. And then we're meeting regularly to make sure we can, air our grievances or talk through whatever issues we have, right? And get all that clear. Because anytime something happens that's not spoken of or isn't resolved, it resolves itself by someone leaving and you don't even know what happened, right? And so the more we can kind of work through those things together as a team, also the longer the retention has been for us. So those would be just a couple things maybe to highlight. Just kind of being mindful of the positions we're hiring into, keeping the community together with communication and regular meetings, and then also knowing the limits. There are limits to what we do, and knowing what those look like too.
It's interesting, Dan, and I'm not even sure where my question is, but might be something that you have a thought on. Being my age, I came from the upbringing in the business community where when I walked and opened the door to go into whatever company, I was no longer Lori. I was this mechanical robot. I communicated nicely, but you didn't have personal discussions. There was this way arm length transition between who Lori was in the workplace and who I was as a person. And when I did turnarounds, that was even more so because I was coming in as this new person and having to cut staff. And then, that wore me down and it was taking away who I was as a person. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be that anymore. I'm going to be a spiritual human being and also someone engaged in the business world. And I'm not saying I figured it out by any means, Dan, but I think everybody and the whole business community in general is playing with that question of how do we interact? Who are we? When is it personal? When is it business? And I think you're a good one to comment on that because you're toggling in both worlds. So I'm just going to say, any thoughts on what I say? Does it resonate? Anything to add?
Well, I would just say, like, for me, kind of not going in to like build a big business and like focus on profitability, just always being focused on people. With that kind of approach, I felt like I always had freedom to just be myself. And just to kind of be who I am, not hide like, my experiences in ministry or whatever. And I'm learning myself as I grow the business. Right. And so I think, just when you're thinking about the business and your concern starts with people, that gives you the freedom to also just be yourself. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't like team dynamics that are hierarchical and structured, right? Because I still have to pay the bills and I got to make those decisions of how the bills are going to get paid and all of that. But I think it creates a space in which people are more comfortable to communicate with one another. And then I found that by adding mid-level management, that also helped us create more room for people to engage and talk and discuss, because they had maybe a safer person, right, that they could chat with, that they could go to. And then the other thing I've always done is had an HR consultant available. Right. So even though I'm a small business, right, we have a small team, we still have an HR consultant that is external to us that they can call and say, hey, I want to be able to have this kind of conversation. And that's become invaluable along the way for a young person not knowing necessarily how to engage in the workspace. They have a person they can go to get some feedback, and then we can come together and bring, find a resolution. So I think having kind of a structure of like just being yourself, but then having some space in between has really helped our team, kind of find a good rhythm, find healthiness as a community, and just be really happy. Like I feel like, we have a team that's, we're obviously challenging them to continue to improve and get better, but they want to be there. They want to be a part of what we're doing. And that's, I think, for me, the ultimate joy.
Yeah, and great advice. And you mentioned being happy, and it's funny because I already had the last question in my mind, or close to the last, and that is you used a word throughout, and it's one of my favorite words, and that is learn. I look at myself as still a child. Oh, well, I learned to do this, or I learned to do this, or what if I can do that, or what I can do that. And I think when the human spirit is exposing themselves to things that are just a little outside their comfort zone, and then they're learning and they're flourishing, it is the closest way to create peace and inspiration and excitement and happiness and all those wonderful emotions we have to go after. And it seems to me you have gone way outside comfort zones time and time again. And as I'm talking with you, I can see the energy and the excitement. So do you think learning and experiencing new things, as well as with the youth, as well as with yourself, is a fundamental part of creating a happy life?
It is for me. 100%. Yes. Having grown up, my father was in the military, so we were constantly moving, and so that exposed me to a lot of different cultures and groups. And to get the most out of it, we really had to like just engage and get out there. And so I think for me, learning's kind of always been one of those strengths. I didn't realize it was such a strength until later, and but I've also learned that too. Another learning lesson in that, right, is that like it's not the only strength to rely on, because there's others that have already learned. I don't have to figure it all out, and that's something I've had to curb a little bit, to say like, yeah, it's energizing and exciting, but behind me, you want to leave a space that really others can excel in, as you kind of learn that. Otherwise, you're going to learn too much and take on too much, and that doesn't help anyone. So the one thing I've had to like is really find the people that we can raise up into the positions that can get handed off. And I think, so that also is part of what brings me great joy, is the community that's a part of what we're doing. And so as much as I'm learning and pushing myself, my hope is that it's creating space for others to flourish in their gifts and what they excel at. And so I think if you get those in balance, then you can stay in your sweet spot and keep the joy, keep the energy and happiness going.
Beautifully said. Well, as we're coming to a conclusion here, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to add anything else that you want to add, but I also want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience ways they can find you, ways they can get involved. I know, especially, with youth, a lot of people in the audience might be thinking, well, what can I do? Can I hire them? Or what can I do in my community? I know I'm saying quite a lot, Dan, but I just want to give you the stage to end and let us know anything that could benefit us and benefit others in our knowing.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe just the last thought is, I'm not so sure like entrepreneurship is a like born gift. I think it's a learned gift. I think anyone can see a problem that they want to solve. and just work through it. So I think like maybe one encouragement is like, start with whatever need you feel like you would love to address, and then think through the economics to sustain it. And I think that, you know, anyone can do that. So just really maybe a word of encouragement. If you see something you feel like you need to address, go for it. And then figure out how the economics make sense as you do that. And then as far as like staying in touch, yeah, I'd love to. LinkedIn. On the LinkedIn side, you can find me through the Alliance for SoCal Innovation. Love to have you visit Rosebud Coffee in East Pasadena. And that you can just look for us on Google or Yelp, and you'll find Rosebud. And then if you're interested in the youth side, I'd love to introduce you to our program manager, or operations manager, I'm sorry, Melissa. And she would be someone that could really set you up as far as partnering with the youth. We are obviously raising funds and looking for donations to support Coffee with a Cause as it expands to other locations and other small businesses. But if you also just want to learn how that system works and connect with youth, we'd love to have opportunities to place them somewhere. So would love to stay in touch.
Well, I am completely honored to have you on the show. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Dan.
Lori.
Lauren, was this not just another remarkable interview?
100%. I'm also a coffee lover, so it was definitely near and dear to my heart. And then everything that you're doing with youth, amazing. Such a great story. Thank you for sharing with us.
Well, thank you again, Dan, for being on the show. And I want to thank you for our frequent flyers that are here with us every week. I saw all the good mornings in the chat and everybody introducing each other. I think that's just fantastic. If you're new to the show, thank you so much for being here. So thank you for being on Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams. And I will see everybody next week. Lauren's going to stay behind. Make sure you get all the information, the contact information, everything you need to know. And Dan, thank you again. We're going to have you back on, because who knows what you're going to be involved in next. I can only imagine. So we're going to go, well, we just started this enterprise of companies and we're going from there. So you're on my check back in every once in a while and see what Dan has learned and created next. So thank you, everybody. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Dan. Thank you to everyone who's participated in the chat today and just joined us today. We really appreciate it. We hope to see you next week. That's going to be Wednesday at 10 a.m. for another episode of Small Biz Talk, solutions for your small business. Take care, everybody.